Elevator Systems, Bowen Family Systems Theory in brief for a life of learning. Welcome to Elevator Systems, where we look at ideas from Bowen Family Systems Theory in brief and understandable ways, starting with an elevator pitch. In our most recent episodes, we looked at religion and politics, so today we are doing the last of the Don't Bring This Up topic. We are talking about sex, but specifically we are going to talk about sexual abuse scandals. And I'm very pleased to have Kathleen Cotter-Cauley joining us again to discuss this important topic. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Kathleen is a licensed marriage and family therapist who has a private practice in Virginia and Florida. She's been a faculty member at the Bowen Center since 2012, was involved in the founding of the Florida Family Research Network, and has been on the faculty of Extraordinary Leadership and Systems Leadership Seminars. Some of her community service efforts include working with guide dogs and being part of review boards for sexual abuse scandals in the Catholic Church. Kathleen is also a wife, stepmom, and a grandma. So you get to start us off with your elevator pitch on Bowen theory and the area of sexual abuse scandals.
Thank you so much. My elevator pitch is very, very vague. And I would say that sex abuse scandals are not so much about just sex, as most people know. And today what we'll do is utilize Bowen theory to broaden the lens around this topic.
Good.
Ooh. Okay.
Little teaser.
I think what I have been trying to understand better as I've been thinking about this through the lens of theory is I went down the path of where my reactivity tends to sit in, which is how individuals and systems allow bad behavior to continue. So that's kind of where I'm thinking in my pitch is this happens in families, in religious communities, governments. I worked in a restaurant where I saw this, this perpetuating, like letting bad behavior continue. And I am not clear necessarily. I find it hard time managing my own reactivity in this when I see it on a larger scale versus when I can sit with a family around it. So that was something I was bringing. Like, what's the difference in looking at this in a larger process versus, my own comfort in seeing it in family? But I'm going to use a quote in my pitch that I had in a conversation with Amy Post, who said it better than I could have. And she said, people are not able to hold a position of right and wrong because of the pressures to keep things calm. And I think in relationship, that is the resource that I think Bowen theory can give me, is the challenge of all of us to keep relationships calm. And sometimes that clouds our thinking. So there's my long pitch. Dixie.
Good. I think Bowen theory offers a framework to observe both the zoomed out and zoomed in aspects of the people and systems involved in sexual abuse. Bowen theory highlights how anxiety influences how people and systems operate, and that under stress, tension, or threat, the patterns of conflict, distance, triangles, and over and under functioning begin to intensify. I think that theory ideas are helpful when thinking about all of the different groups that are involved in sexual abuse scandals, to consider the challenges that each face and observe the ways that groups and individuals attempt to manage them. So today I ended up with a different example, but I did watch the movie Spotlight in preparation for this, which looks at that 2002 Boston Globe article that exposed the Catholic priests in Boston. And within the first 2 minutes of the movie, there are the groups. You have the victim and their family, the police, the lawyers, the church, the media, probably a social worker in there. So many different groups, each under stress and weighing their own kind of survival over exposing or bringing to light a great harm. So I think Bowen theory is helpful in lots of different areas of life, kind of like you're saying, Katie, in evaluating the sometimes very complicated cost benefit of speaking up or staying quiet. Okay, I have a few other pitches from an article from Walter Smith, which I will link to. A psychological understanding of behavior does not reduce personal and social responsibility. Parents who abuse their children are responsible for their actions and to the laws regulating acceptable social and private behavior. Yet we are constantly responding to one another in families. The actions of one family member trigger the actions of others. These relationship interactions and responses can be observed, described, and understood without implying decreased individual responsibility. Linking violent behavior to family and social conditions does not diffuse individual responsibility to regulate and manage one's own responses. And then one from Dr. Bowen. I believe anxiety is the crucial issue. The research families all have a low tolerance for anxiety. They operate on a peace at any price principle. They quickly compromise important life principles to relieve anxiety for this moment. Of course, this peace at any price policy immediately causes greater anxiety for tomorrow, but they continue the compromising attitudes to relieve the anxiety of the moment. Not about sexual abuse, but a general example. All right.
Well, I think that last part that you said is just so important, though. What stops people and keeps people going? The idea, there's so much pseudo self in what happens. There's immaturity, there's pressure, there's the impact of anxiety and staying calm, as you say, or watching all the patterns come out and the triangles come out in any of the places where this goes on, where people just don't have enough self or courage or whatever it might be named in a family to stand up for what they believe in. It's so much more complicated. I was struck in my work with families in the Catholic Church abuse scandals, those young people who right away went to their parents immediately and said, there was trouble today at school and here's what happened. It was the teacher, it was the priest, it was whomever. And those who would not even imagine going to their parents. And these are young people who knew the family system. They knew their place. They knew their parents' place in the church. They knew what the cost was, if they would be believed, if they would not, if their mom, who weekly was at church, would even begin to believe them or not. And so there was this calculation that the whole family participated in. And I think oftentimes the perpetrator would know that family system, would know the vulnerability, would know the child whose mother was alone and had 4 kids and maybe needed a break. And that could be where the grooming would start in that example. And it explains a lot about why people don't come forward for years and years and years. That family unit is sacrosanct.
Yeah.
And they were taken advantage of in huge and calculating ways. So I think that it is such a big topic. And we don't want to spend today on the Catholic Church, but one big example I would leave us with was the example of Cardinal McCarrick, who is now deceased. And he was a master, and people were shocked and stunned at the level that went on with his behavior for years, with people giving him money, big donors, big donations, big festivities that he would be involved in. And he was taking advantage of seminarians who were in the process to become a priest. He had power. He had incredible charisma. He had this kind of cunning ability to be a master manipulator. And there was a man, in the end, when all of this was exposed, there was a reporter who had a quote that I thought described it. He said, all of us were his victims in the end. And that included everybody. That included the public, those who were never touched, those who were never compromised, but who put this figure on such a pedestal. that the sentence that we often hear when someone is exposed is, "Oh no, that would not happen. That this person would never be part of that." So he was kind of the poster child for just how cunning. You got to be pretty good at what you do to have it be at that level. But we can leave the Catholic Church now and get broad.
But I think what I appreciated in one of them, that this just I think was one of the quotes, like the complex web of relationships. Like there is so many interlocking triangles, using an idea from theory, really, like these ways that people are connected. And at each one of those connections is a tension point, right? A tension point of how someone's going to manage themselves. What is the cost to them? How do they respond? How anxious does it make another person on the other side of the triangle if they speak up? So I think that was something that I heard sort of in all those posts. And at the same time, really acknowledging, I heard, that there is wrong here, right? There is, just understanding the system never takes away from the wrong that someone has committed, that they have perpetrated on others.
Well, Katie, and I think that is a conundrum always, to keep that on the front burner, that it is wrong, it is horrible what happened, it's a tragedy what happened. But then there's also this bigger picture. Yeah. Because it can sound as though a professional or a person who's thinking systems is skating across the seriousness of it. Yeah. That's very tricky. I mean, I remember when the scandals first came out, I'm a believer that people often went to the church to get comfort and safety and the love of God and to be in the pews. And a lot of people who were drawn to the church also had sexual abuse in their families. They had stories of incest and stories of rape and sexual secrets. And when these scandals erupted, I think it just blew up in so many situations. The idea that I am no longer safe. I wasn't safe in my family. Now I'm not safe in the church. But it was not addressed. It was not addressed to say, because it couldn't be. What about the people in the pews? What is coming up for them? And I would go to various churches and say, I will be happy to come and speak here, but I will be talking about the secrets in people's families that this has also triggered. Nobody ever asked me to come back.
Well, and I appreciate that. The power of a secret in a family system that can get really locked in multi-generationally about what we talk about and don't talk about. I mean, I think that that's been an interesting theme that's run through the season. Is I don't know that I think it's an accident that people sometimes are comfortable talking about some things versus other things in their families. And sex is always a big one that, thinking even about just the logistics of how do you talk to your kids about the sexuality in general. And now here, when there's been crimes committed, how do you have that openness in a family system to allow those things to be spoken about?
I wanted to go back for one second. I was thinking about in the Spotlight movie, the article came out in early 2002 because 9/11 had just happened. And they were like, we can't do this at Christmas. People need the church now more than ever. And so they waited until early 2002 for this article to be released. And so I was thinking of what you were highlighting, Kathleen, of what the church has done that is beautiful and wonderful, and also these really, really horrible things. And then thinking beyond the church of this has all come up in recent decades in terms of sports a lot, gymnastics and hockey, and what is different about, you don't throw away gymnastics. Maybe like some people would throw away the church. It's very interesting to me what is different in terms of sports versus religion when these same things.
What do you think? Where do you come out on that?
Well, I guess maybe there's a little bit more of there there is more of an ethic of behavior embedded into a faith community than sports. But
I don't know.
I think there's a way to separate it a little bit easier. What are your thoughts, Katie?
I was thinking, I don't know that I agree with you that people don't choose and steer not to. I can think of friends who have steered their children away from hockey because of some of the attitudes around misogyny and sexuality that get really perpetuated in that community, and not wanting to have their son, specifically, I'm thinking of a person, that's a place that they wouldn't want their child exposed to those belief systems. And I think the church would be the same way. Is how do people think about the way things are managed? You know, I've heard this talk about even more broadly about in a culture where people get very authoritative, there's rule following. And how does a person do their own thinking? And this is going to be my example later, but how does a person do their own thinking in a culture of, you know, authority where you're expected to follow the rules of the system? That's everywhere.
It is everywhere. And I would say that one of the ways the Catholic Church did not get credit was what they have done pastorally is just unbelievable. And it just doesn't, I mean, it doesn't come up a lot. Or when it does come up, people will right away come out and say it's not enough. They're not doing enough. But they're doing so much in terms of meeting with people and meeting with the victims and bringing them to review boards and on and on. And so, you know, whether it's a sports team or a denomination, who wants to keep hating the Catholic Church or a sports team, or, you know, oh, well, no, they're not. They don't really have our best interest at heart. I mean, I look at what's going on in politics, and I look at this whole Epstein situation, which is, you know, in our face, then not, then let's bring it up. No, let's not. I mean, it's fascinating to me. I mean, I've been trying to read some of the themes, and some of the themes that I have been observing in what they call the Epstein class, that the ideas or the attitudes of people in this huge network are to keep your options open, don't speak out, don't meet with women. You know, women are for kind of frolicking around the pool and maybe to be minimized and discredited. The self-centered, the money as top priority, the power, the attitudes, the structure of power, the indifference, and all of the things that were transactional. What can you do for me? Here's what I can do for you. There's this big, huge disconnect that people have to have with their interior life, their emotional, spiritual well-being. And it is almost a way of being so distant from oneself in this network to gain favor and, you know, to curry transaction and to keep people's reputations intact. The immaturity of it all is, it's very deep. Nobody understands it. Everybody thinks it's about, you know, maybe who had sex with who. I think it's much bigger, much, much bigger than that. And it's the underside. It's like the underbelly that is there. And it's taboo. So much of this is taboo. People don't want to talk about it.
Well, and I can tell you just when I start reading, I took a deep dive reading the things. I just am so observant of how my emotion takes over. You know, how angry and frustrated and sad, you know, and I lose my thinking. I mean, I have found, you know, reading some of these things and details, I lose my ability to think clearly about what to do, you know, having a really thoughtful position. So that was useful to me, just to observe in myself. And it's not better. I mean, like I still know when I read about these things and look at them, I just get really emotional, real angry.
Well, let's take a little bit of a look, because I think that that's probably true for most people. We lose our principles. We can't stay the course. We can't stay with the facts. We maybe override our good thinking about how we're going to behave, how we're going to have a voice in it. And I think what people do a lot of the time is they split off from the politician and the personal life. I mean, that has driven me wild for a number of years. Well, it doesn't matter what people do in their personal life. This is what they do in their policies. I say, I can't separate those things. I can't separate character and put it over here and put policy over here. But many, 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 many people do this. And so when you think about, they had this thing on the Daily last week about Michael Jackson in this movie that came out, this new movie that came out. Right. And there were 200 million people that went to the opening weekend. Now, you know the controversy about Michael Jackson. Is it true? Is it not? What was factual? What was not? They took that Netherlands movie off from being available in streaming. But here he is again. And one of the men on the Daily said, the human being is so hardwired with nostalgia for Jackson's music. And I thought, boy, that is so well said. The hard wire but we love the music. Yeah. Well, do you know what was going on here at Neverland? Yeah. It's just unbelievable how people can split that off. But very, very common that people can split that off. Yeah. The person from the behavior, the values from the behavior.
And is there a evaluation of that in what you're saying, Kathleen, that it's right or wrong, good or bad, or it just is?
I think it's what people do. And I think if we're working at differentiation of self, we have to think that through. What is my voice in this? What do I really think in this? So that I'm not joining the polarizations or criticizing people who do this, but instead saying, well, how do you do that? Staying curious. How do you separate that out? How do you take the character of a candidate and not assess it as having anything to do with how they will lead? How do you do that? And often you're met with a blank screen stare because people haven't often thought it through. So I always think it's useful to try to be able to share our thinking, if we don't lose it, like Katie's saying, and get at the thinking of others. Ask people to think. What do you really think? How did you get there? How did you think this through? How do you separate that out? How do you listen to Michael Jackson's music and not pay attention to anything else? How do you do that? Yeah. And it can lead to some interesting discussions.
And again, I think the difference that you're bringing up to, Kathleen, is, back to connecting it to the secrets. And regardless of what happens in the conversation, it's opening the discussion in a way that's different than just me dissociating, right? Like at least the engagement is opening the conversation and the thinking in relationships that I'm close to and that are important to me, and, versus just going below the surface again.
Well, and you know what you said about secrets. I think Dr. Bowen is quoted as saying some secrets are better left kept, as they are. Secrets can be assessed over a long period of time in different situations, clinically and in families. But the thing that I most enjoy about secrets is how they manifest in the family emotional process. So you have the content of the secret. I know, for instance, that Dixie steals money from people's purses when they're not looking. And, I'm sorry, Dixie, but this is your chance to come clean. So, Dixie's in my office, and I leave for a minute, and I kind of know. I've heard through the triangles, Dixie's going to take something from my purse. And so then I come back, and I say, you okay, Dixie? Yeah. Well, you look different than when I left. No, I'm good. And this tension sets into the way we're now relating. We were having a pretty decent conversation. Now we have tension. Or you take it into a family Thanksgiving dinner, and a father who had incest with a daughter years ago. He knows this. She knows this. They're fighting every year. He's thinking, who knows this now? Did she tell my wife? Did she tell her brother? And she's thinking, did he tell my sister? And so this anxiety in the group about who knows and who doesn't know and what do they know, that takes over And people can't think. They can't really think about what they're even talking about at the dinner table. They're too busy managing the secret. I think theory has a lot to lend to that process.
Kathleen, that was one of my questions that I was bringing is, can there be secrets in an open system?
Ooh, where'd you come up with?
I mean, I'm still chewing on it, but I have heard the same thing where there's some secrets that are better left not spoken about. And I think I'd probably err towards that still keeps the system a bit closed. Mm-hmm. I do think that there is a way that one shares secrets that are more for self, and then there's a way that people share secrets that are more about other. Not right or wrong, just I think that it'll land differently in the system if I'm coming and saying I found out my parent had an affair, and I'm talking about what it meant for me and the way it's shaped me and my relationships, versus saying I want this person to be mad at that person. As I think it's, so it probably depends on how it lands. Just like I've heard, sometimes when an individual shares an affair just to make themselves feel better, but basically hands over that challenge to manage to the other person, is, there's so many ways this dynamic can work. But I imagine at some level, if there is a part of relationship functioning that is kept a secret, that system is a little tighter, a little less open, less loose. I don't know. I'd be interested in your thinking.
If you think of sex abuse scandals in families that play out in society, play out in these organizations, sports teams, schools, teachers, Boy Scouts, Catholic Church, Methodists, wherever, how does it play out? All of these people have a functioning position in their original family. And if they were in the middle of knowing secrets or having knowledge of other people's secrets, I just often wonder how many people who are involved in these societal organizations where there's sex abuse scandals, what do they bring to the table from their own story? It would be so interesting if we could do a Netflix show, get people to talk.
That was one of my questions to you is, how much would it be useful to understand how a system pattern gets going if we were to sort of put the main players' family diagrams and understand the way, just that question alone. I would be interested in how would secrets and cutoff work? Just because of the observations of Walter Smith around how cutoff is one of the things he observed when there is a lot of abuse in the family. They're pretty cut off from the rest of the system. So I think it'd be so interesting to just better understand, to me, with the hope of saying, is there a way we can do something in our society to interrupt this process? Because it obviously keeps occurring in organizations, in groups, in structures. That is one constant thing. You just named 6 different examples, and I bet we could all think of a billion more. Dixie, I know you came with an example.
I sure did. And maybe we have a lot of non-Canadian listeners, but there is a Canadian author named Miriam Taves and a wonderful writer-director named Sarah Polley. And there is a movie and a novel called Women Talking, and Sarah Polley won Best Screenplay for this movie a handful of years ago. And so it is a sort of a fictional imagining based on true events from some Mennonite colonies in South America in the early 2000s, where men have been convicted of anesthetizing and raping women of the colony. And the movie is women talking about this. So thinking about making something talkable, bringing secrets out. And what's interesting, so I highly recommend people watch it, especially with the theory lens on. It's 3 generations of women in a barn and they've all experienced this abuse, and they're talking, and they have a vote as a colony. And most of these women are illiterate in the early 2000s. Their options are do nothing, stay and fight, or leave. And they literally vote by, someone has drawn a picture of what it means to do nothing, to stay and fight, and to leave. And so it's interesting because you can see the individuality and togetherness, that push and pull within the women themselves and within the colony, sort of between the men and women. The men are away for the day, and there's major consequences for them. If they don't forgive, they will lose their place in the kingdom of God. If they leave, they have to create a whole new life. At one point, they said maybe we should ask the men to leave. And they said, well, we've never asked the men for anything, not even to pass the salt. Wouldn't it be funny if the first time we ask them for something, it's for them to leave? And then someone also said, can you define what you're fighting to achieve, not just what you're fighting to destroy? So, 3 generations talking, and do they bring the teenage boys with them if they leave? And how do they not recreate, like, what's to stop this from starting again wherever they go? So, and it's beautifully done. But I don't know, have either of you heard of that movie before?
I've seen the movie.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't read the book, but I saw the movie, and I appreciated that people were willing to sit in that discomfort of those conversations. And I think I appreciated so much about that movie that different people went about what they were willing to risk and give up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think it did a great job of really talking about real life about this.
Yeah, and the ramifications.
Yeah.
And not taking it lightly, and having a group like that, like you're saying, Dixie, to really reflect on all the angles. Mm-hmm. It's no small thing for people to navigate.
And I think it's true. I mean, I saw it in Spotlight, the consequences of, I'm pursuing this story and my wife is mad at me because I'm never home, or we can't lose the church support, and there's all sorts of costs that people,
and the real life complexity. I was thinking back to our episode that we did with Sam, where she was working with a victim of abuse, who didn't want to prosecute, and really her own position she took against a family system, that this was the action that aligned most with her values. I mean, I think that it also names just the complexity of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was thinking, I'm not going to go into my example too much, but I was thinking about the ways in which, how do we as a species work towards being able to sit in uncomfortable conversations? I mean, I think one of the things that was really, I was thinking about as I was reflecting on this, is the challenge that is to our species, to sit and hold on to self, to stay interested in other, in really challenging conversations.
And tamper down the urge to eject, not talk, go away. That's enough.
Or tell somebody what to do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's it.
How does it work in the natural world? That's another whole discussion too. How does all of this work in the natural world, where they can't speak, they have a lot of sex?
People, and I just was spent the last weekend at the Center for Family Consultation with Sarah Blaffer Hardy, who wrote the book Father Time. And I did a presentation on thinking about family therapy. And one of the things she said to me, because I was talking about getting people to think about self versus other, and she said, animals are constantly trying to get the other person's attention and move the other and get the other person to do something. That is just in us. Like, that is a part of the work. And it was just useful for me just to think about, despite our big brains, to think about what we're up against and how often we're really trying to get the other people in our lives, in our families, in our systems, in our relationships to do something. But that is very, very much the animal part of us. So that was useful for me, just to put things in perspective.
That's right. And the primitive side, animals don't explain away their primitive side. They relish in their primitiveness. And yet, when I think of Bowen theory and the the intellectual system and the feelings that we're aware of, and then this deeper emotional system that is part of the theory. What do people mean by that? It's kind of amazing how many people don't want to think they have a primitive side. Whether that's to act out sexually or to have affairs, or, oh, I would never have an affair. I say, oh, no, don't ever think that way. Because we have a primitive side. And many, many people will pretend we don't, or blame or finger point at those who act out, missing the point that we all have this primitive side. I mean, I've got 7 boyfriends that my husband doesn't know about.
Well, hopefully he doesn't listen to this podcast.
Yeah, I know.
Also, I think, Kathleen, the other part that I think I took from her as an anthropologist, just thinking about the togetherness side of this, is many animal groups are working together as a community. And how does an animal community manage bad behavior? I imagine there's different ways they do that, right? Which one might be ostracizing, right? You kick them out of the colony. They're not allowed in. But I imagine, sometimes they would figure out how to correct the behavior, how to work with it. Maybe there's some where they adapt to that behavior. I think it would just be interesting to think of that comparison to the way we go about it as humans.
And what brings change long term versus, well, we've just booted that person out, but the same thing is going to show up in a few months or years. Did we get to everyone's examples? Do we have takeaways? I mean, we didn't mention Bill Cosby and how I bought all those DVDs and then it all came out and
let him off the hook.
Yeah.
My takeaway that I'm just going to continue to think about how to hold on to my thinking, how to just think about if I'm observing something that I'm not comfortable with, that I don't distance from that discomfort and really think about it and push back, I think, against some of the efforts of the system to quiet things down. So that's the thinking I'm going to leave for myself doing.
My takeaway is to speak up and be a voice in the mix after this, after the reflection and the self-regulation and the really knowing what people do think about what they think, but then be a voice, take the next step, have these conversations, step out a bit into a system with your own voice.
Yeah.
Curious.
Yeah. Dixie, do you have a takeaway?
Well, I don't know if I have a takeaway. I think everyone should watch Women Talking, number 1. And I guess I just think, how does Bowen theory help see the process of change and managing, like you say, difficult behavior, Katie, essentially what works? How could we observe kind of what works back in, whether it's in our own families or organizations or in the past, and what prevents us from seeing or participating when it's right in front of us in today. So
it definitely appears to keep happening. So there are opportunities to think about how do we learn from this and do something different
and not be so shocked.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here again, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The three of us together make it run smoothly. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you, Kathleen, for walking with us in this difficult topic. If any of you are interested in thinking and learning more about Bowen theory, this is the time of the year where most of the programs who do trainings in Bowen theory begin to put their programs out. I know at Living Systems, we have launched our programs for the fall. I know Kathleen, who is associated with the Bowen Center's learning and development programs are also launched. And I also wanted to note for this audience, those of you who are listening that are interested in thinking and learning on Bowen theory, we have just put out our call for abstracts for the international conference, which will happen in July of 2027. So you have time to think. So if you are interested in submitting an abstract, and sharing your thinking. There are a lot of different formats you can do that. Please get in touch with me or Dixie, and we would be happy to connect you to that resource to apply. We'd love to hear your thinking. And lastly, if you're interested in supporting some of this behind the scenes things that happen here at Living Systems and the Elevator Systems podcast, please consider donating to Coffee. Dixie will put the link in there, and it does help make support the efforts of the podcast. So thank you so much.
Good. I hope our listeners will take some ideas and questions to do your own thinking as you go out into your relationships. This podcast is produced by Living Systems, a nonprofit organization in Vancouver offering counseling and training programs in Bowen family systems theory across Canada.